Hello, and welcome to Thought of You, a podcast where we share our group chat with the world. I am your co host, Amelia Fruby, and this is my co host.
Taylor Elise Morrison.
And today we are coming to you with a special back to school episode of Thought of You, where we are going to talk about our PhDs and we're going to talk about taste, which was the topic of my dissertation. But before we get into that, we're going to kick it off with our first thought, best thought segment, which is where we just tiptoe into the episode with whatever is on our mind the day we're recording. So, Taylor, what's your first?
My first thought, best thought is an encouragement to lean into back to school in Virgo season energy. I was telling Amelia before we recorded, I'm a Virgo rising. There was like a switch that flipped and I have locked in. I am upgrading my desk environment. I drew us a little thought of you on my new mini whiteboard that you can't fully see, but it's got like gold accessories. It's very cute. I've just really upgraded and for multiple reasons. There's like some shifts that are happening professionally for me as well, but I'm also getting a lot of joy coming to my desk and seeing things be really cute. So if there's just like a little thing that you can do to make your workspace better, go ahead and do it. Spend like the $20 and do it and get exponential returns on it. That's my first thought, best thought. Amelia, what is top of mind for you today?
Today, I am thinking about the thing that I have been thinking about all summer and will continue thinking about all fall, which is my upcoming book. So, for the viewers among us, here it is. Your attention is sacred, except on social media. I wrote this book in January. I've spent the whole year putting it together and getting it out, and it is going to release in October. So I think by the time our next episode comes out, the book will be out, and maybe I will be thinking about it a little less by then, but also maybe not. Like, you've been through a book launch, you know, Taylor, that like it is all encompassing. So it is my first thought, best thought, every single thought right now.
Yeah, I was like, Amelia, we've been here before. We know that the book is going to be top of mind for a while. But I love your optimism. And thankfully, this is like a topic you enjoy talking about. You think deeply about, you think lightly about. You've exchanged some fun memes with me about it. And so hopefully it's not too much of a burden for you to be thinking about social media and what it tries to steal from us.
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like I've already recorded over 100 podcast episodes on it, and I will record over 100 more on these themes in different ways. And, you know, that's one of the things that makes me really happy to be self-publishing because when you work with a traditional publisher, it can often be like a year, if not two, between when you complete the manuscript and when it actually gets out into the world. And I'm over here being like, it took me 8 months and that felt like so long. So I like that on self publishing, I get to be a little bit more on my own timeline. And I'm excited to bring the book to the world. So, Taylor, our last episode was, I think, like a really interesting and nuanced one. And we have a couple circle backs from it. Would you take us into our first circle back and what you're bringing back to the show today?
Yeah. So last show, I let the veil slip a little bit and talked about how I have this morbid fascination with the far right. And recently, a podcast that I really appreciate, It's Been a Minute, broke down some of what's happening with the way that this administration is using memes. I know I talked specifically about the meme that had Manifest Destiny themes. I don't know how closely anyone pays attention to the things that are coming out of the White House Instagram account and DHS and others, but they really talked about how this is a strategy that is being used. And some of the rhetorical devices that happen when especially the far right is using memes. So if you're curious about it, it's about a 20-minute episode. It brings up some additional examples of what exactly the administration has posted, but also what strategically is happening behind it. So I just thought that was a nice follow-up. I'm making it sound really heavy. They do a good job of informing you without depressing you. So you can listen to it and still have a smile on your face ish. Question mark.
Smile-ish question mark. I feel like there's definitely an emoji for that sentiment. And honestly, that like really taps into what we're going to talk about today with aesthetics and taste and like, you know, the sort of subliminal messaging that's coming across and the ideology that can be transmitted or communicated through memes. And I also have a circle back from our last episode, which is that last time we talked about eugenics, as I put it in the title, or as we put it in the title, but essentially the conversation around Sydney Sweeney's ad for American Eagle jeans and the eugenicist rhetoric that was in those ads. And then since then, Gap has put out a huge splashy denim ad featuring Cat's Eye. Like Cat's Eye is this global girl group. There's a whole Netflix show about them. We can link that in the show notes. I like ate it up because I love a competition show that involves singing and dancing. Like that's one of my favorite pleasure viewing opportunities. But essentially, it's supposed to be the sort of like first K-pop girl group created in America was kind of the premise of the show. And so you have these like tastemakers auditioning girls and training them, and they go through a sort of accelerated version of a K-pop training camp in Los Angeles, and then they form the supergroup, whatever, Cat's Eye. And Cat's Eye did this ad for Gap where I mean, you'll just have to watch it. It's really enjoyable. All of the girls are in it. All the young women are in it. And it has really been lauded as a sort of like response, callback, call out of the American Eagle ad. And as we're recording this, it has almost 8 million views on YouTube. So it's definitely doing numbers. I haven't seen any reporting on if it's selling jeans, but it has entered the chat of how do we talk about jeans and identity and advertising. And maybe it's important to note, if people aren't familiar with Cat's Eye, that the members of the group all come from different backgrounds, have different ethnicities, and I don't think any of them are white. So, Taylor, have you seen this ad? Have you continued any explorations of eugenics?
I've seen it. I loved it. And a couple thoughts that I had. So, Gap seems tapped into the moment, but a different moment than what American Eagle was trying to tap into, which was more like the, I mean, like we said, eugenist. The quote unquote, like all American vibe, where Gap, I feel like, was almost doing a recession pop kind of moment of like, times are hard. People want a moment of joy. And yes, there was the diversity embedded into it, but I just thought it was smart to say, like, everyone is feeling overwhelmed right now, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum. We're all being affected by a lot of things. And, like, what if we could give people a minute to smile and see some good dancing? And yes, the people dancing happen to be of different races and ethnicities. So I just thought it was really smart. Like, even if this would have happened outside of Sydney Sweeney, I think it would have been successful. It gave me kind of Jungle vibes too, of like, I don't know if you've seen some of the Jungle music videos for their album. Yeah, so I think it would have done fine in the first place, but then contrasted with this recent ad, the American Eagle ad was so joyless. Like, I'm just thinking of, it was like so gray and blue, and she's like talking in her like whatever, like monotone voice. I don't, even outside of what American Eagle was saying, I don't know why they thought that was appealing. And Gap seems like they were having a Lady Gaga moment. They were meeting the moment with like joy and levity.
Yeah, we'll link it in the show notes so folks can go watch the ad if you haven't seen it. And I hope it does bring a little joy to everybody's day, life, week. I don't know, 2025. We could all use a little joy this year.
Absolutely. Speaking of joy, I'm going to talk about something that is bringing me a lot of joy, has brought you a lot of emotions. Maybe that included joy at some point.
Maybe.
We got a request to talk about our experience with PhDs. So, if you don't know, I'm currently in a PhD program. I'll talk more about what that is in a moment. Amelia, Dr. Amelia Ruby, PhD, as Matt, my husband, loves to call Amelia, even just in passing conversation, like asking how Amelia is, loves to have all the letters and titles, has a PhD in philosophy. So let's just share a little bit about our experiences. We have really differing experiences and journeys to our PhD. So I can jump in and talk about mine. My PhD journey started, man, I feel like I thought about it for a really, really long time. I like school, which is funny because I both like and am frustrated by school. I think this is actually the most I've ever liked school because I have a lot more autonomy in it. And when my book came out in 2023, someone else had a book also on self-care come out the same day. And this person was at least a decade older than me, was an MD psychiatrist. And I was like, man, she's getting just like a lot more respect than I am. Just being candid. Like, and I was like, if people would take me more seriously because I had some letters after my name, maybe it's time that I finally go all in on this. And so I had already been thinking about it for a while, but this was an inciting incident for me. And then I spent about a year shifting things in the background professionally and preparing myself for a PhD. So I am doing technically a part-time PhD, but really every semester I've taken full-time hours at the University of Central Arkansas in their College of Education. The program was called Change Leadership for Equity and Inclusion. There's a lot going on in Arkansas. It is now called Change Leadership, and my concentration is in community leadership. I chose the program for a few reasons. I really liked that it gave me the opportunity to be multidisciplinary. So in my work, I do a lot of professional development, a lot adult learning things, and I'm also super interested in developing people as leaders. Originally, I thought I was going to do a dissertation on how leaders impact employee well-being. Now I've kind of shifted directions, and I liked the program because of its scholar practitioner model. So the goal is to get people who are going to take the insights that they learn and bring it into professional practice rather than having them stay in academia and continue to research on it. So I think that's like a big difference in how it's preparing me personally. Another thing that's different is these are people who I'm one of the younger people in the program. We've got the oldest people are probably in their 50s, and everyone has to have professional experience and a master's beforehand. So we're coming in with like this body of work and knowledge beforehand that we're then funneling into a PhD. And I've loved it. My mom was laughing with me. My mom was an English teacher at one point in her career, and she used to edit my papers, and I would just get so frustrated, or like I'd have to do something in math and I'd just be like, this is so stupid. Calculators exist. I am not like, there are math things I need to know how to do. I'm so glad my mom drilled me on mental math, but there are math things that I don't need to know how to do. And like, why are we doing it? And so I'm working on this paper right now. I'm submitting my first paper to an academic journal, and I am obsessed with it. And I'm telling my mom how obsessed I am. And she's giggling because she's like, I'm just thinking of all the younger versions of you that hated doing certain things because people were telling you what to do. And now that you have the autonomy, you're just like going crazy and thriving. So that's at a high level my journey to PhD work. I've really enjoyed it. It's honestly making me think, like, do I want to adjunct or do I want to sprinkle in other things because I enjoy research and especially for me, like theory building more than I thought I would. I could talk about this all day. I'm going to pause and first see if you have any questions or like things that listeners might want to know about my PhD experience, and then we can transition over to you.
Yeah, yeah. Could you share like what's sort of like the arc of your program? Like how many years is it? What do you have to do to get your PhD? What are the requirements? Some more of the like nuts and bolts of what goes into the type of PhD that you're getting.
Amelia, with the practical, tactical questions. So let me pull back. So you have to finish your PhD within 10 years. There isn't a set amount of time that it has to take. If most people follow the track, they'll finish it in 3 to 4 years. I'm on track to finish mine in 4 years, I think. Um, but it depends. So most people take, we have like 60 credit hours or something, I forget, that we have to take. Most people take 2 classes a semester. My advisor was like, why don't you try and take 3 classes and then see if you feel like you can do it? And you can always just get the syllabi, realize these classes are too demanding, and then drop one of them. So far, I've been able to do 3 classes, which is why technically I'm a full-time student, even though my program is more part-time. So in order to get your PhD, you have to write a dissertation doing empirical research. So that can be qualitative research studies, that can be quantitative. The difference between that is like, am I doing something numerical with numbers, or am I doing something that's more storytelling and analyzing the themes in people's stories? I'm leaning towards a qualitative or a mixed methods dissertation. And you have to go through that whole process, get a dissertation committee in order to graduate, in addition to the classwork that you have to do. You have to do concentration classes, which is, think of that kind of like your major. And then there's overall classes that you have to take for the program. And it's a mix of synchronous and asynchronous work. So some of my classes meet more frequently, others meet less frequently. A lot of like discussion board, online things. What I do like about being in a college of education is that some of my teachers are really interested in like the best practices for synchronous and asynchronous virtual learning, because no, I have not moved to Arkansas. And so I like, yes, have to write the traditional papers, but also have been challenged to present data in different formats, whether that's like a video presentation, or like we had to do one where we were talking about all these different theories, and we had to try and put it in like the most creative format that we could. And so I ended up talking about the different educational theories through the lens of how people relate to cars, and whether that's like the production process or the advertising process. And it sounds very high concept, but it was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's so interesting. And as listeners will soon hear, it's so different than my experience. Okay, but I have one more question for you, which you can answer like personally or just more generally. But it's a question I've always had about like getting a PhD, like after you've had a job and like made money, which is like, how do you pay for a PhD like this? Like, are you paying tuition? Are you getting loans? Do you have scholarships? Do you do TA ships? Like, what is the funding landscape like for your program?
That is so good. And that's something that I meant to bring up and didn't. So bless you. Thank you. I'm paying for mine. So that was another factor, is like, what did I feel like I could afford? I looked at 3 different programs. One of the programs I could have like moved to Vermont, gotten a fellowship grant. But the thing is, like, what they were going to pay me is less than what I make on my own. So it made more sense for me to pay out of pocket. If I were close, my program like has some people, several people, I guess it's 50-50 of like people in the Arkansas area and then people across the world. Or I say across the world because one of my classmates is like doing a project in Japan. So technically a United States citizen, but just happens to be in Japan for the next several months. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah. So for the people who are close to the school, they can get like graduate assistantships and things to help offset the cost of their tuition. That's not available to me.
How does that relate to your business? My other question is like, how do you have or make the time to like run your business full time and be a full time student? When does this happen?
Another great question. So for me, I, like I said, I spent that year kind of reimagining what my work looked like. That's part of why originally I was building the inner workout app, RIP, was because I could have something that like generated revenue that didn't take as much of me from a one-to-one perspective. Um, Now I try and focus on what are the ways that I can make the most money, have the most impact, and still have a lot of flexibility of time. Um, I sometimes will be able to do work during the workday, but it is a lot of like nights and weekends, me doing my PhD. So that's just something that I've had to accept is my social life is going to be a little bit smaller because this is something that I'm committed to. And already it's been helpful. Like I'm within a pretty large organization leading all these trainings on change, and to be able to say that I'm currently pursuing a PhD in change leadership adds some credibility. Or I'm doing more stuff empowering other people who are facilitators, and being able to say, yeah, I've just recently taken some classes where we're talking about the neuroscience of education, again, is credibility building. So I've already seen it be helpful, not just for me as a practitioner, but also add some gravitas to the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Do you think that it changes everyone's perception of you, or are there like certain areas, like, in a meeting with corporate bigwigs or something, where it matters a lot more? And then also, how does it change your self perception? Has it started to land in your own identity yet?
Yeah, so I'm still figuring out. I'm realizing is like there's a lot I didn't know about PhDs, even though I really started becoming good friends with you as you were wrapping up your PhD and you were so ready to be done with it. We'll talk
Yeah.
about that momentarily, I'm sure. And then, so I think for the general population, it probably is just like, oh, you must be really smart because you're doing a PhD. And like doing a PhD really isn't like, yes, there's an element of being able to write and articulate an argument, but it really just means that like I'm good at reading and writing and making connections, which I don't think speaks to my intelligence necessarily. It just speaks to a skill set that I I have. Um, I do think it's helpful in corporations. Also, part of we were just talking about this in one of my classes over the summer. Like, I'm a young Black woman. People think I'm much younger than I am. Like, I'm 30. How old am I? 32. Someone thought I was in like my early 20s. Yeah, I was talking to someone in a coaching program that we're peers as coaches. And he was asking, I went to Vanderbilt for undergrad, and he was like, oh, my son's girlfriend went to Vanderbilt. Maybe you were there at the same time. And she had graduated like less than 4 years ago. And I'm like, oh no, my 10-year reunion is coming out. Like I am not,
Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
not the age that you think I am. And so having that, I do think is helpful to pull out when I need to. In terms of self perception, it's been such a beautiful journey. I think it's made me more aware of what my strengths are. I'm currently working on this paper that I'm really enjoying because I'm realizing I like bridging different disciplines and different theories and making an argument. That's exciting to me. Sometimes I get a little claustrophobic with doing things in academia because they want you to be so, so, so specific. And I'm finding a way for me to use that to my benefit where like I can direct where I want the specificity to be and I can make an argument and support it rather than like having to follow this other formula. Um, I'm really starting to identify more as a scholar. I've been playing with like, yeah, I am an identity scholar. That's what I'm super interested is like social identity as it relates to work. The paper that I'm writing right now is using social identity theory and independent workers to talk about like some of the stereotypes that are placed on people who are not traditionally employed And all of that is fascinating to me. So I feel like I'm home in some ways, but also home in a very Taylor way where I'm like, I don't fully belong here. And some of my people are here.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of self-awareness around both like what you're doing, what you're good at, and how you relate to institutional spaces with that sense of like, I belong here, but I don't belong here. I belong here, but I'm also an outsider, and that sort of interplay, which I also think just makes sense, especially in a university and, a university in central Arkansas that's also going through some of the things you alluded to at the very beginning, right? Where there are all these conversations happening at a national and state level right now about equity and inclusion, and if those words can be in program names and who belongs in universities. And maybe my last question is just how or if you're thinking about that in relationship to your academic work, or have you seen your university or people in your programs like lose funding? Are people being asked or pushed to change their focus? Are you being supported in exploring anything that you want to study? Is the sort of like federal educational climate impacting your PhD work, or how is it impacting your PhD work?
The biggest experience that I've had right now is with the name. I still feel really supported in the topics, and I don't mind. Like, this may sound bad, but I was always more interested in the change leadership than the equity and inclusion, because I already have a lot of experience leading trainings in unconscious bias, and I'm really aware of the theories around there. But for me, it's like there's so much change happening. Equity and inclusion is always going to be inherent to what I do, but I was excited to learn more about the change, and then also the being in the College of Education side of thing, because I do a lot of adult educating and I have never had any formal education training. But I feel really supported to talk about the things and explore the things that I want to talk about. The journal that I'm submitting to is called Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion. And it was flagged to me, hey, they're doing this issue on inclusion as it relates to independent workers. I know that's a topic of interest for you. Is that something you want to submit to? So I wouldn't have even known to go for this if it weren't for people within my institution who said, oh, yeah, this is perfect for you.
Good. I love that you're feeling supported, and that so far the only changes have literally been like in name only. And yeah, it's something I've really been curious about because I'm so far out of universities right now, but I know that they're just like really undergoing a lot of change, both with Trump's overt attacks on certain universities and programming, et cetera, but also with like the rise of AI in school and students using it and how that impacts what it means to learn and write and get a degree. So yeah, thank you for sharing all these reflections. Is there anything else that you wanted to surface or bring into our conversation about your experience and decision to get a PhD so far?
I'm such a nerd. I think the biggest thing for me has been like, oh wow, I'm such a nerd. I am so happy when I'm like, this is the theory that bridges these two concepts that I was looking for. And I'll be like, babe, I just need to tell you this. And he listens and he gets really hyped for me. But yeah, I think there's just been this coming home of like, that this is who I am and I can embrace it. And I'm almost like, I wish everyone could do a PhD. But what I really mean by that is like, I wish everyone had the time and space to think really deeply and critically about things that interest them. And the PhD has just happened to be a nice space with accountability for me. Oh, that's the last thing that I'll say is I think my program is atypical in that so many people, when I said I was getting a PhD, just trauma dumped on me, like all of their horror stories. Meanwhile, my program, I went to orientation. One of our professors talked about like imposter syndrome and the research on how that affects PhD students. And we're like, right from the beginning, we want you to know that you all belong here. You were chosen to be here. We hand selected you. we're going to write letters to we called it our imposter monster, and we played Pink Pony Club. I remember voice noting you this. I was like, oh yeah, this is the space I'm supposed to be in, because we're listening to Pink Pony Club and writing letters to our imposter monster and being affirmed that we belong here, which is really opposite of many of the experiences that I've heard, where it's like, yeah, you made the cut, but you have to constantly keep proving yourself, which I don't think is an environment that I would thrive in. So that's why I'm like, everyone should do a PhD, because I had this magical experience. Don't let my experience be the deciding factor. If you're like, well, Taylor said it's amazing, it might not be that way for you. Amelia, tell us the other side of the story.
Yeah. Okay. Let me talk about my PhD experience. Just to sort of begin where you ended, it's so like beautiful to me to hear you talk about your PhD program being this place where you really like found yourself and come into a different sense of belonging with your like nerdiness, but also people who get it and who are excited about similar things to you. And, I think that there are certainly ways that I came into myself in my PhD program, but I would say like overall, on the other side of it, I do a lot more like diminishing and disavowing that era of my life than I do celebrating and uplifting it. And I have really mixed feelings about that. I have really mixed feelings about getting a PhD in philosophy and really mixed feelings about universities. And I don't know that I will ever fully resolve them. But having begun at the end, let me go back to the beginning. So, as you've already previewed for people, I had a very different experience and journey and path into a PhD. My senior year of undergrad, I had a professor who really saw like a lot of potential in me and saw my kind of like academic aptitude and was like, you should really apply to graduate programs. And he really both like supported and pushed me through the PhD application process. I think I applied to like 4 or 5, maybe 6 schools. I didn't apply to a ton. And I got into 2. One was that professor's alma mater in Syracuse, and the other was DePaul University in Chicago. So that's how I ended up moving to Chicago. I was like, I didn't really know what I wanted to do after college, but I felt like I should get out of North Carolina where I had grown up and gone to school. And so DePaul seemed like a great exit strategy, honestly. And I liked school. I liked reading. I liked writing. I liked philosophy and thinking about big ideas. But from the very beginning of entering my program, I always felt a little underprepared and like an outsider because my undergraduate degree was not in philosophy. It was actually a double major in English and religious and ethical studies. There was no philosophy program at my university. So I really got in to DePaul on the strength of my undergrad thesis and the like depth of philosophical thought in it. And I learned when I got there that the year I was accepted, there had been a sort of initiative, I think a well-meaning one, to bring in a more, at least like gender diverse cohort. And so I arrived and to this sort of funny, like, oh, cool, there are a lot of other like women here and queer folks. And then also a little bit of messaging of like, we did an affirmative action cohort for you. I was like, wait, oh, okay. So I felt like I didn't belong from like day one, essentially. I was like, I don't have the background for this. Oh, I guess I got picked for these reasons. And now what am I doing here? I need to get up to speed. I need to catch up. Like in some of my early seminars, I was behind. I just like didn't know a lot of the reference points and things. And I think that really shaped my first few years in the program for sure. My program, as you've mentioned, Taylor, was a philosophy program. So I was getting a PhD in philosophy. And for me, that was going to entail 2 years of full-time coursework. And then after the first 2 years, you would confer a master's degree and then move on to the sort of PhD program. And at that point, you're still taking full-time coursework, but you no longer have academic funding. So when I was doing the first 2 years of full-time coursework, I got to just TA for other professors' classes. By the time I get to my third year, I'm teaching at minimum 4 classes a year for my funding package, which was roughly $20,000 a year. So my program involved a ton of teaching. I took me 7 total years. So I did 5 years of teaching at least 4 classes a year. Like by the time I was done, I had taught over 20 sections of different philosophy courses and had over 500 students at least during that time. So my PhD path was really characterized by this sort of like being thrown in the deep end of trying to figure out this discipline I had never studied, and then having to balance like a heavy teaching load with being in classes and with studying and making $20,000 a year to live in Chicago. So, by my like 4th or 5th year, I got a part-time job on campus working for their McNair Scholars Program. In my first couple of years, I worked at a restaurant. I was just like trying to figure it out. And that really characterized my whole 20s. So like I spent my 20s in grad school and finished my PhD in spring of 2020. And I defended my dissertation from my kitchen table, which involved like a 4-hour Zoom call where all my professors asked me a bunch of questions about what I'd written. And then I got my PhD, and JJ and I ate cake in our apartment, and I went to bed that night. And then the next day I was like, okay, it's done. I guess that was it. And that was kind of the arc for me. And when I reflect on it now, I feel very grateful that the PhD got me to Chicago, which radically changed the direction of my life. I would not be this person here talking to you if I had not made that move. I probably would have married some man whose job was to provide for me, and I would have had some like part-time or full-time marketing job I hated, and I could just see that much more conservative direction of my life as it was headed. And I'm really glad that's not what happened. So I do credit like the PhD for that. And also like some of the courses I took were amazing. And I did enjoy the process of writing my dissertation. In philosophy, a dissertation is actually like, it has to be a piece of original thought, like something that hasn't been written before in the field. And the way I did that was actually similar to what you're describing, Taylor, which is I like created these conversations between thinkers who hadn't been brought together before and sort of built this aesthetic and ethical theory around those conversations. And I loved that. And I had an amazing mentor at that point, Dr. Maria Acosta, who was just such a powerhouse and also did a lot of research outside the university. She worked with the Chicago Torture Justice Project and brought me into that work. And like, I would not have finished my degree if it wasn't for her and her belief in me and her continued belief in me, even when I told her I didn't want to continue on in the academy. Like I wasn't going to apply for jobs. I wasn't going to seek out being a professor, because the purpose of my program was to train future professors. And when I didn't want to do that, some advisors would kind of stop replying to your emails, but she kept replying to mine and really like coached me through like the fact that she thought it was really important that I finish the degree no matter what I was going to do. And it was meaningful for me to get a PhD, regardless of where that took me. But I want to pause because I just spoke for a while and see if you have other questions or reflections from everything I just said about my PhD.
It's funny because I've heard bits and pieces of this, but I've never heard it in this arc. So even for me, as someone who's been your friend for several years, I'm like, oh, okay, this is how it all came together. And I, for one, am so grateful that you ended up at DePaul so that we could be friends. This podcast would not exist if Amelia did not pursue her PhD. You alluded to having mixed feelings about academia and universities. Can you be a little bit more explicit about that tension that you have now with claiming a PhD? Because there are also like, I feel like it's relatively recent that you really like claimed your PhD, whereas there are moments where I could think you would not mention it all in the context of business, that this is like an experience that you had.
Yeah. So in terms of my mixed feelings about academia, that has a lot to do with the sort of ivory towerness of academic institutions. So the program that I came into, actively sought out undergrads to recruit for the program because they wanted to shape your way of thinking. At the time, I was like, oh, cool. And now I'm like, that's so brainwashy and weird. And I think part of that was because of the like living and working conditions of PhD students. Because as you've already shared, Taylor, like you're in a very different type of program than I was in. And so for my program, everyone was supposed to be residential, and you technically weren't supposed to have a job outside the program. So you were really just supposed to live off of this stipend you got for studying or teaching. And I think that when they brought people in younger who hadn't had jobs that earned salaries, it was easier for them to have that's like to normalize that. Also, they didn't give us health care. So we had to pay for that out of this tiny salary that we got or the stipend that we got. And so I really like I have a lot of feelings about just the material realities of being a graduate student and being in a PhD program, and a lot of feelings about the exploitation of labor of graduate students and adjuncts that universities rely on to teach these programs. That's one side of my mixed feelings. The other is that I often felt like moving through my PhD program required buying into this false narrative that it would pay off one day when you got a tenure track job, even as I watched the majority of people in my program never get a tenure track job. Like they would finish their PhD and be like 5, 6, 7 years out from that and not get a job because the jobs weren't there. Like these are brilliant, accomplished, published, great teachers. Like the jobs just didn't exist for them. And so it felt like I had to buy into this sort of myth that there was a job waiting for all of us when in fact there wasn't. And what it took to get those jobs was pretty fraught and really challenging. And so I also have a lot of mixed feelings around like what is the purpose of a PhD? And I think that there are still many programs out there, especially in these more like traditional academic disciplines, that are presenting it like a career path when I just don't think that that's the case. And at the same time, as a combination of those two things, another thing that just really bothers me is the gatekeeping around the knowledge and the title. And, you know, people in my program would have listened to everything you just said about your PhD and then said, that's not a real PhD, though. Like, that's 100%. Yep. I still can sometimes feel that elitism sneaking into my thinking because they brainwashed me into it, right? Like, it was under there. It was like, to convince myself to keep going in this path, I had to believe that it was somehow like special and superior to other paths. And that is just really tricky, sneaky thinking that I've had to continue to root out. Like, I think that I love education and I love like the democratization of education and learning is for everyone. But when you get into the upper echelons of these PhD programs in private universities in very traditional academic disciplines, the elitism comes out in full force. And I still don't think I've fully reckoned with that. It's much easier for me to just be like, yeah, I guess I got a PhD, whatever, than it is to like own it because I don't know how to step into that title without bringing that elitism along with it. Or like the people who gave it to me embedded it in there. And I don't want to claim that. I want to disavow that, which makes it feel really complicated to talk about or name myself as a doctorate or a PhD.
Yeah, I'm hearing this tension of like, I'm laughing because I'm thinking of, I think it's that song from The Rock where it's like, put in the work, put in the hours. And I'm just thinking of how you did that. Like you put in years and thousands of hours into it and you are hesitant because of, like you said, the institution that has conferred and validated the fact that your hours matter. And how can you honor the work without giving your gold stamp of approval to a system that has a lot of flaws?
That's definitely how it feels, or that's the tension I sit in. And I think the reason I've started talking about it more, and like talking about like putting PhD in my bio, even putting it on the front cover of my book, is actually for similar reasons to why you decided to pursue a PhD. It is a little bit of like, I want people to take my ideas seriously. And like, if I'm being fully honest, like, I want to elevate myself as like a higher level thinker based on the fact that I did put in the work of like 7 years of intensive study in how to shape ideas. Like, to me, that's what a PhD in philosophy is. It's how to connect, how to understand, connect, and synthesize ideas in a congruent way where you can't have logical leaps or fallacies or disconnections. Like, you really have to learn how to do that to get a PhD in philosophy. And I think that this year, as I wrote this book, and as I watched a lot of people start like stepping up to speak about attention and social media and the things I've been talking about for a few years, there was definitely a part of me that wanted to like put my PhD on things to be like, okay, yes, I love everybody's ideas. And also, I have thought about this to a depth and degree like I learned to do in my academic study. And I guess putting PhD on my name is a shortcut for me to try to signal that to people.
I hear that and I resonate. That is one of the things that has been an unexpected byproduct for me in my PhD study, and I'm just entering my second year, so I'm quite early on. But realizing, oh, I am being taught and challenged to think critically to a degree that we are not challenged anymore. Like, everything is set up. The economy is increasingly being set up for us to outsource all of our thinking. And so to have this dedicated time and training and thinking and really having to make like this paper that I'm writing, it's just so much. I have to be able to defend everything that I'm saying. It's helpful and really valuable. And so I, for one, am glad that you are owning this. I think it's something that is innate to you. You're like, it's funny to me to hear you talking about, oh, I would have like married some man in North Carolina, and maybe you would have, but I'm also just like,
you're like,
you would have
also
divorced
would have
him
divorced.
if you did. Like,
Yeah, I just skipped that decade.
yes, exactly. So I think the last question I have for you is, knowing what you know now, Amelia, who has written multiple books, the most recent of which, actually, do you have PhD on 50 Feminist Mantras?
No, because I hadn't conferred my degree when it went to print.
Ah, yes. Okay. So as Amelia, who now is a PhD, has that on the cover of your book, knowing what you know now, what would you tell this early 20-something person to do when their professor says, I see a lot of potential in you, you should apply? If you could time travel, would you tell her to do it or not do it?
I would definitely tell her to do it. Like I said, I needed to get out of North Carolina, and I didn't have an evident path for that. And quite honestly, back then, when I was 22, I had a pretty good perspective on grad school. Like, I very much went into this program being like, I'll do my 2 years, and if I don't love it, I'll leave. I'll like, confer the master's and do something else. I think the me that really needed maybe some perspective setting was more like the 25, 26, 27-year-old me that was just floundering, trying to figure out if the academy was for me, if I wanted to be a professor, if this was a path I could go down. And I tried for a while to follow the path that like all of my faculty and advisors said I should take, and I hated it. And I perhaps wish I had spent less time doing that. And if I were advising someone else who was considering getting a PhD, which actually I did a lot of, because when I worked at the McNair Scholars Program at DePaul, that is a federal program that helps students from underrepresented backgrounds apply to PhD programs. And it helps them through mentorship and funding. Like, it pays for GREs and applications and all of this. So I taught all of these different prep courses and classes, and I read applications for all these students, and I helped them rewrite their personal statements. Like, I did a lot of mentoring of students going into PhD programs or considering them. And these were students who often, their parents hadn't gone to college. That was part of how you qualified for the program. So they're really considering like higher education at 22 and trying to figure out, is this for me? And, I think what I always tried to do then and what I would do for people now is to make sure that they're going into this with sort of an open-eyed perspective on, are you doing it because you love this field and you want to explore it more and you're excited about that? Or has someone promised you a job or a payoff that probably isn't really coming for you? And also being really clear around like, this is how much money grad students make, and these are your other options if you went and got a job or you did something else. Like, this is not the only path just because the professors you currently like are telling you it's great because it was their path. So I think that's sort of the advice I would give. Like, do a PhD for the love of it. Don't expect a job on the other side. Yeah, that sounds bleak when I say it that way. But I think I said something similar to you, which was like, go for it if you love it. Be open to what it might bring you because it probably won't be what it promises you.
Yeah. And it's funny because I do jokingly tell people like I'm kind of just doing a PhD for fun. Like, yes, it does give me credibility in different things, but also it's like this elaborate hobby that gives me some letters at the end of my name.
Yeah, it's both like a really profound and meaningful thing to pursue and also like a silly little piece of paper at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, I feel like we've now talked a lot about our PhD programs and what they entailed and how we feel about them. And the other topic we wanted to get into today, as I've already previewed, was one of the major topics of my dissertation, and that is the topic of taste. So, Taylor, are you ready to talk about taste?
I was born ready. Actually, I was not born ready. That's part of what we're going to talk about, but I'm ready now.
Yes, beautiful. Okay, so why don't we begin with just like a sort of intuitive hit on like what is taste and why are we talking about it? So from your perspective, Taylor, like why is taste coming up for us or for the world at large right now? And what are your initial thoughts about taste?
So when I think of taste, I think about it mostly in the context of personal taste, and also like I mentioned, I'm really interested in social identity, and so like how the concept of taste is constructed by in groups and out groups in society. I think the reason why it is so popular to talk about taste right now is because we're experiencing this algorithmic attempted homogenization where it feels we have like the sense that we're developing taste, and this is not original thought, plenty of people have said this, but we have the sense that we're developing taste, and it's really because Spotify put this on our Discover Weekly, or because the algorithm said you're a person of this age and in this location, so I'm gonna feed you these videos on TikTok and you'll decide that you start liking this thing. It's very Devil Wears Prada. You think that you think that you chose the cerulean, but that's because this thing and this thing and this thing happened, and now it's on the rack at TJ Maxx. So I think those underground pieces of taste making that were happening more before by editors at Vogue are both more underground. We can't see an algorithm work, and also more apparent because at least we have the language to say that something is happening that is moving culture in certain ways. Yeah, those are my initial thoughts on taste. And I know that you have both like a similar and different way of how you think about taste.
Yeah, I think that, just to begin, like, I would agree. I think that conversations about taste are coming up a lot right now because people are noticing or not the influence of the algorithm. I also think that it's entering the milieu again, sort of as a counterpart to conversations around like AI slop. And as the internet feels more flooded with like generic, homogenous blog posts or whatnot, we're sort of once again seeing a rise in curation as like a primary form of influencing and content creation, and this emphasis on like I think a genuine questioning from a lot of people of like, how do you develop or can you develop a sense of personal taste in a world where like everything that's delivered to you is kind of based on what an algorithm thinks you want to see. And I think that that's bringing up a lot of questions around like, what is good taste? What is personal taste? How do we develop it? And I also love to think about when we say taste, there might have been people listening who are like, you mean like in your mouth, right? Like taste, like the sense, right? And I think that there are interesting connections between like a sense of taste, which is both like so personal, right? Like it's literally happening inside of your head, and also a shared human experience where we all have, there is scientific research on the different taste buds and the different elements of taste and how each of us encounters them differently. And then also culturally, like the shared foods that are determined like good foods. And, then there's also like the cultivation of a palate. And you have like sommeliers whose whole job is to like learn to taste or to smell really well. And so I think that taste really wraps in a lot as a conversation. And I definitely think the reason it's coming up right now is for what we've already shared. Like the algorithm and AI are sort of bringing taste back to the forefront or back into question again.
I think you're right.
So I think that one way into a conversation about taste, or at least my way into this conversation, is that I like to distinguish between taste and personal taste. Because I think that most often when people are talking about taste, societally, like in the zeitgeist right now, they're talking about personal taste, which I would identify as like a clear set of personal preferences in a particular area, right? Like you may have a personal style, you may have a taste in film, you may have a taste in interior design. And personal taste, I think, is often relatively subjective. It's just like what each person is into or enjoys. And then we may make judgments about other people's personal taste as like, oh, that's cool, or that's weird, or that's interesting, or, oh, I love that. And I want to, copy it or riff off of it in some way. So I think all of that is personal taste. But for me, the reason I wrote a dissertation about taste is because there is a rich history of philosophical research on taste. And in that context, we're not just talking about personal taste. So the sort of backbone of my dissertation was a reading of the philosopher Immanuel Kant and his book called The Critique of Judgment. And in that book, he's talking about beauty and beauty in art and nature, and the way that we have these experiences of the beautiful and of the sublime that are both subjective and universal. So there's a sort of idea that like you can stand in front of a work of art, or you can look up at the night sky and be like totally in awe of it. And the way that it stretches like beyond your individual experience. And that while that is your personal experience, there's also something like bigger and grander happening there. And so, I was really interested in aesthetics because I had some really wonderful experiences with works of art and paintings, particularly one painting that I saw at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. It's called Untitled Mirror Girl by Carrie James Marshall. And when I stood in front of that painting, I don't really know how to say this other than like, I knew it was true. And it wasn't just true for me. I was like, oh, this is like true with a capital T. Like, I really felt that sense of like, I'm having a personal experience, but this is like fucking beautiful and everyone should think it's beautiful. And I've also had that experience looking at the night sky in the desert, or feeling just a sense of awe that is so overwhelming. Like, it's so meaningful, it reminds me of my meaninglessness. And that's what the study of aesthetics is trying to get at or trying to understand. And for me, the question that comes up is like, how do we connect to our shared being on the planet but not in an empirical way and not in a necessarily spiritual way, right? So if we circle back to personal taste, if we make it totally subjective, if taste is just about your personal preference, then it's just about you. But in the philosophy of taste, it's really trying to understand, like, what does it mean to have a universal human experience as an individual? And how do we understand that without just appealing to science or appealing to God? Because you can say something is a shared experience because science proved it to you with facts, or because God has offered this like reason for it. And I don't really find those compelling. But with art and beauty, I was able to tap into that subjective but universal experience. Does that make any sense? Have you ever had experiences like this, Taylor? Am I just a weirdo, or has like art or nature ever evoked something similar in you?
Yeah, you're not a weirdo, but either you are not a weirdo or we are both weirdos. Jury's out on that.
Fair.
One of the best things that I've done is my parents and I split an art institute membership, and so I go just way more frequently than I have. And there's something so special about standing in front of a piece of art and just having that feeling. I think actually the most recent, I'm getting teary-eyed thinking about it, when I was in Houston, which great art museums, by the way. I know Houston is one of the biggest cities in the country. I just was not familiar with their museum game. And they have this chapel that, oh my gosh, why am I forgetting the artist's name? They have Rothko Chapel. Yep, they have this chapel with Mark Rothko's art. And if you don't know, he's like kind of abstract, and it's like these shades of black in what feels like a sanctuary. And they have pews and they have meditation cushions, and you can just like sit there and be with the art. And especially as someone who grew up in the church and is no longer Christian, to have this secular space for all of us to come and experience art with reverence is, I feel like, exactly what Kant was talking about, where we're just coming in and almost like worshiping at the altar of art. But also, it's not even that we're worshiping, we're just like having this experience where we can all, and again, I'm like, I'm not sure if it's all though, because I can picture people in my life who would go there and be like, cool, this is some black paint, in and out. But I like sat there and meditated with it and allowed it to wash over me. So this is why I both deeply understand and am also a little bit critical of like the universalism, because at the end, like, Kant is a white guy, and like, no offense to white guys, but have a long history of saying that things are universal when it's really hyper specific to them.
Yeah, and Kant is not just a white guy. He was like actively racist and sexist. Like, he didn't think women could be geniuses. He didn't think black people were human necessarily. Like, he's a super fucked up figure, as is almost every man in the history of philosophy, especially before the 21st century. So all of that is very present with all of this. And I think that the part that I like about it that you don't like, and I think this is like a disagreement for us, which is fine. Like, I think that there is a sort of like moral imperative within embedded in Kant's work, that like when you're really talking about something that's beautiful or sublime, there should be this like universal agreement around it. Like it elevates to the level of like, this is like an ethical imperative. This is like an impulse that we can cultivate and experience. And I think I am not invested in that being attached to any particular work of art, but I am pretty invested in that being like a shared human experience and us all finding it in our own way. And I want that for people. And I think for me, like, that has become a mark of like people I'm interested in being close with and sharing community with. And that I find that like they have this shared sense of like, they've felt that awe. They've felt that, again, like meaningfulness and meaninglessness. And I think that's what Kant's getting at with the universal piece. So he delineates between the agreeable, the beautiful, and the good, and says that like the agreeable is really just about like gratification. Like, I want it, I get it. So, you know, I always think of the agreeable as like eating ice cream. It's like, that was totally gratifying. I love the ice cream. Or, you know, watching a TV show could be another example here. Like, I loved it. That's what I wanted. I got it. Great. The good is actually about like something being good for something or good for reason with a capital R. And so in the good, you have a sort of sense of like, this is the concept, and whatever I'm looking at has like aligned itself with that. But with beauty for Kant, like what beauty opens up is this free play between like our imagination and our understanding. It's the ability to be in an experience without immediately conceptualizing it. So like looking at a work of art and not immediately being like boring painting or weird man with hat or something else, but just like holding open that moment of not conceptualizing it and finding pleasure in that, finding pleasure in it being inconceivable to you. So that's what I'm always invested in, is like, how do we cultivate more moments like that? And the whole work of my dissertation was to argue that that's actually like an ethical orientation we can carry through the world into our interactions with other people. Is like, how do we actually like not so quickly lock in and lock down our conception of other people? How do we not make such snap judgments? How do we resist the sort of even neural pathways in our brains that are immediately like good person, bad person, based on all of the stereotypes we carry with us? How do we hold open the space for people to surprise us and to delight us and to be different than we think they are, or we have been told to think they are? And that's what I love about aesthetics. And that's what I find in it. Although, do you ever do the thing where like you have a super nuanced understanding of a topic, so you say you love it, and then you realize like actually maybe what it says is not your super nuanced specific understanding of it? Because that's kind of how I feel about Kantian aesthetics.
But that's what I'm hearing. And I'm like, when you talk about what you're thinking, I'm like, yes, I think I'm invested in an Amelia Ruby translation or yes, reading of Kant. But like when I sit with the actual ideas, I'm like, I'm not exactly sure if I can fully get behind what Kant himself is saying. But when I went through a phase where I was like interested in aesthetics, partly because of my human design, which is, I have a lot of sixes. I mean, my human design, my matrix of destiny, I have a lot of sixes in my chart. Six is all about beauty. And I was like, let me read some philosophy. And then I was like, wait, I know two philosophers, Amelia and her partner, JJ. Let me get some initial things. And you recommended this great little book that is called Aesthetics, A Very Short Introduction. And so it got at some of these ideas of Kant where I'm like, ooh, yes, I kind of like this part. I don't fully like this part. But when I look back at my notes of what I wrote down and what I took with me to digest further, it was this idea of aesthetic experiencing. And I kept thinking like, okay, what does it look like for me to intentionally have these aesthetic experiences as someone who is so in my head, and my therapist is always reminding me how in my head I am, to just have these experiences where beauty can wash over me and I don't have to make sense of it. I don't need to be able to say that I'm really into this song because the bass line gets me moving. I can just be in the song. And that's kind of the big takeaway that I got from learning the very fractional amounts that I do about Kant.
Yeah, I think that like aesthetic experiencing is for the like over intellectualizing girlies what somatic experiencing is for everyone who's like very much in their body and trying to like understand the world in that way. I think that there are some parallels that are about like tapping into knowing on a different level and also recognizing the limits of logic and of intellectual thought. That's very much what aesthetics is about. It's like trying to explain these experiences that don't make sense if the only way you think about the world is like empirically. And so, yeah, that's also what I love about it. And so I guess to just wrap up my diversion into my dissertation, like taste as a philosophical subject is really about understanding that type of experience and understanding this relationship between like the subjective and the universal. And that's different than like cultivating a personal sense of taste that's really about maybe perhaps like showing your individual authenticity which is something that a writer that you introduced me to writes a lot about in her book, The Substance of Style. So you sent me this book by Virginia Postrill earlier this year, and I'm curious, or earlier this month, and I'm curious, like, how you found it and how it's shaped your sense of taste and what taste means to you at this point.
Yeah, so this is another example of like why I just needed to go ahead and get a PhD because I get interested in something and then I just read a lot about it and I'm pulling in different ideas and I'm asking my friends who are experts in the subject and I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do all of that anyway, I might as well get some letters because of it. So I found this book in my aesthetic meandering, which was, I think, like end of 2023, beginning of 2024 was when this happened for me. And so I got some of the basic philosophy of it. And then I'm like, okay, these guys have been dead for a long time. What are people saying now? And this book is still, I want to say about 20 years old. I think it came out in the early 2000s. But what I liked about it is that it talked both about some of the aesthetics. I think it's been a while since I read it. So I think it talks at a very high level of the philosophy, but it gets a lot into design. And for those of you who don't know, I'm married to a designer. Growing up, and we'll talk about this probably a little bit more later, but like I have people in my life who have very refined senses of taste. And so I liked this integration of the design of spaces and objects and all of that wrapped up in this bundle of talking about aesthetics. And there's a lot of good things that she said throughout the book. But the key takeaway that I got from it, which honestly seems very similar to where you ended up in your dissertation, is where she talks about like our choices are meaningful. Our aesthetic choices are meaningful. They say something about us. They say something about the world that we want to create and to experience. And it felt there was something refreshing about being able to reclaim the idea of quote unquote liking pretty things. Like, it's not just liking pretty things, it's me crafting an experience in a world that I want to live in through my aesthetic choices that I really appreciate. And she meanders a bunch of different ways throughout the book. So honestly, I want to put it back to you because it's fresher in your mind. And as you say things, I'll probably be like, oh yeah, I remember that part of the book and dot, dot, dot.
Yeah, I definitely think she begins with a sort of high level overview of aesthetics and talks about how like aesthetics is communicating through the senses. It's not happening on a cognitive level, it's happening in a different way. And I would say this book is definitely like a defense of beauty and trying to make the point that aesthetics isn't quote unquote just aesthetic. It's not just surface level, but it actually conveys a deeper meaning. And like you said, these choices that we make matter. What I liked about it was one, it's very much grounded in the 21st century. And two, she sort of makes this defense. I'm going to read a quote here from the book where she says, "Beauty in its many forms no longer needs justification beyond the pleasure and meaning it provides. Delighting the senses is enough. I like that rather than this is good design." And I actually don't know if I agree with that, but I do think it speaks to the difference between taste and personal taste. Like the concept of taste is trying to make some type of claim that like this is good something, and personal taste is just like I like it. And when I think about taste myself, I actually sometimes differentiate even between personal preference and personal taste, because I think personal preference is just saying I like it. I think personal taste is having a little bit more understanding of like why and the other things you like in conversation with one thing you may like or not. But yeah, I enjoyed the book and how it helped me figure that out. But I also want to go back to you, Taylor, and ask you, like, what does taste mean to you now?
It's funny too. I just want to say I also highlighted that quote. And for me, it felt really permission granted granting for me to be able to say, yes, I do like that thing. And it doesn't have to fit into some larger system for me to like it. And as we were preparing for this conversation, I just kept coming back to me in this moment. So much of my reclamation of my personal taste is going back to the sense of this is truly work that I'm doing in therapy. Like one of my pieces of homework for therapy was to walk around and notice like what things, she didn't say aesthetically, but like what I found beautiful, what gave me a feeling in my body, and acknowledging I like this thing and seeing if I can notice what I like about it or what the trends are. So it's funny. In some ways, my therapist is helping me reconnect to and cultivate a renewed sense of personal taste. And I say renewed because I'm a Black woman who has navigated predominantly white spaces. And I'm really starting to question what was instilled in me as, quote, to use her words, good design, or what was tasteful and what was tasteless, because I can't really think about those things without thinking about white supremacy and respectability politics. As I was preparing for this, one of the essays that came to mind was this essay I love by Langston Hughes that's called The Negro Artist in the Racial Mountain. And it's really him talking to other Black creatives about respectability politics. And he's really calling out that for the Black middle class, and I was raised in ranges between lower middle class to upper middle class as a Black child, the measure of success was so often how close you could get to whiteness. And he's challenging that. Like he says in the first line, one of the most promising of the young Negro poets said to me once, I want to be a poet, not a Negro poet. Meaning, I believe I want to write like a white poet. Meaning subconsciously, I would like to be a white poet. Meaning behind that, I would like to be white. And as I read this and contended with it, I thought how so often in my own childhood, the things that seemed to have the highest level of taste were either explicitly or implicitly having the standard of trying to be white, whether it is the conversation around what is good hair or not good hair. I think for me, there is a lot of growing up in an evangelical environment, which now I'm able to say there's so much white supremacy in that. But like the music I was or was not allowed to listen to ended up reinforcing certain beliefs about Blackness and whiteness, even as my parents made sure that I had Black dolls, made sure that I was seeing Black people doing all kinds of things, make sure that I had characters in Black books. And yet, I remember this. I was writing a book for, I don't know if y'all did young authors. Every year we had to write a book, and my main character was blonde-haired and blue-eyed. Even though I had all of these books that had been purposefully selected by my parents, it could not overcome the rest of the world saying that the protagonists who are going to get the most amount of attention are going to be blonde-haired and blue-eyed. And after my mom made a comment, I ended up going back and rewriting the character, and it was fine. It wasn't really fundamental to the story. But I've just come to question, and even actually reading Substance of Style, I remember reading that she mentioned certain principles of design and being like, oh, this is really interesting. And then I got this book, The Black Experience in Design. And in that book, they're directly contrasting against this idea of simplicity and sleekness that is, in many ways, at least they argue, related to white supremacy. And like the intricacy of so much indigenous art was erased and said, like, the good thing is this MCM, mid-century modern kind of look. And when I look in my place, I have a mix of the sleek mid-century modern lines, and I also have all of these different textiles and textures. So all of this to say, for me, I can't talk about taste without having almost this fraught internal discussion of what do I like because I like it and it feels good to me and it's soothing to my nervous system, which sometimes it is those sleek lines. I just need the simplicity of it because my brain is so chaotic. And what of that is a result of the mere exposure effect, where I've been exposed so much to these white supremacist ideals of what is tasteful that I can't access what is maybe more inherent to me. And I'm always wondering, am I like being a bad black person because I like this thing that is more aligned with whiteness, or et cetera, et cetera. So that was long and meandering, but it felt really important to say in the midst of this conversation about taste because it's so top of mind for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And as it should be. I think that what is powerful and dangerous about aesthetics, whether you're talking in the sort of, substance of style way or in the Kantian way, is that it acts upon us at the level of desire and our senses. And so one way I've come to understand this is that like often the things that we can think like are our nature, like the way we are, the things we dream of and desire and want might actually be kind of second nature. They might have been implanted in us subliminally or not so subliminally, like implicitly or explicitly by the oppressive societies that we live in. And I think that this is the work of liberation, is exactly the work that you're doing. And a lot of it begins in the way that your therapist is supporting you in beginning. It's just like trying to move through the world with that gut check of like, what do I desire or not desire? What do I enjoy or not enjoy? What do I find pleasing or not pleasing? Like, I think anyone who exists on the margins in any way has to begin the process of unlearning the sort of aesthetic norms with their own, by reconnecting with their own experience. And then also it does require this sort of layer that you're speaking to of like questioning, okay, I like this, but why? This is how we get into conversations about like compulsory heterosexuality, right? Where because of the strength of the norms of heterosexuality and heterosexual coupling, many people never or don't for a long time realize that they don't actually desire a partner of the opposite sex, quote unquote. Heavy quoting there. So I think that I'm really glad that you're bringing this forward. And it's also always just a helpful, maybe not helpful is the right word, but it's just always a good check for me because I have such a specific relationship to the concept of taste, but I do see how it is just inherently fraught when you live in a world where like none of the taste makers, again, heavy quotes, like look like you, or you're told that your personal taste is bad because it doesn't align with the norms of whiteness.
Yeah, I feel like personal taste is like bad or tacky at best and like demonic and evil and going to send you to hell at worst, like depending on the time of history that we're talking about. I'm reading this other book right now, of Water and the Spirit, and it's by this Black scholar who both has been in the academy, he has a PhD, and also was raised in, I want to say it's Burkina Faso, but it's more focused on his tribe than his actual place. And he talks about the tension of his experience growing up, learning about the church, truly kidnapped from his home. Like they took him from his home when he was 4 and were like, you're going to become a priest. And the calling on his life from a tribal perspective was like, his name means befriend the enemy. So he's like, oh, shoot. So my job is actually like, I need to learn the ways of the white world and translate some of our spiritual practices and teach them to the white world. And then vice versa. I need to teach my people some of the ways of the white world. And in reading that, just being reminded how violently people's taste and practices were stolen, it makes me emotional and it makes me upset, especially as someone who used to be a Christian, be like, oh yeah, bring the gospel all over the world. It's like, you were kidnapping children. You were beating children for speaking their own language and for like having the practices and the taste and the like. In the author's culture, he talks about how like pink is this beautiful and holy color for them. And then I think about like in our culture, how it can so easily be dismissed. And there's just all of these connections I'm making. And so, yeah, that's why I think I feel especially prickly and resistant to the idea of, not that I don't believe there are experiences that are universal, but I get really nervous when we say like this piece of art or this thing is universal, because my question is always universal for who? Because in my experience, universal has rarely included me.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that this is why this conversation is so nuanced as well, because with the concept of taste, I think people are always trying to hold on to something that is like innate to each person, like that you can have a sense of taste in defiance of the powers that be. And also, we have to acknowledge the ways that white supremacy and colonialism are so powerful that they shape us even on the level of taste and of our desires. And I think that all of this gets wrapped up in these conversations around taste. And I think for me, it's a live thought, so we'll see where it goes. I agree with you that any claim to universality is typically, you didn't say it this way, but I'll say it this way, like a claim of whiteness. And it's a proclamation of a white universal if it comes out of a white person's mouth or pen or keyboard. That's how I take it with my own self reflection on that. And the reason I still don't like collapsing taste into personal taste is because I think there is something shared at the heart of taste that we're like opening up together. And this actually comes from a political conviction where like I'm not interested in a world where everyone just like gets to have their subjective political opinion because it doesn't bother other people. And I often see people sort of make a really slippery slide between like, oh, this is my personal taste and these are my personal politics. And I think that both in the realm of taste and politics, like we're trying to open a shared ground that we can like move in together or make agreements or commitments together. And so as I think this through, like that's where I would locate my sort of commitment to taste with a capital T, perhaps, rather than just saying like it's only about personal taste, which isn't what you're saying, but I'm just trying to think this through for myself.
I love this. Like I feel like this conversation, maybe more than the other conversations I we've had together in this context, is really forcing us to like articulate some of the things that maybe we haven't fully surfaced separately or together before. So I'm getting so much out of this. And I wanted to just, we'll link it in the chat, but the book that I just mentioned is Of Water and the Spirit by Malidoma Patrice Somé. And yeah, he's a brilliant writer, 2 PhDs, multiple masters. And if you're curious about, especially for the spiritual girlies, like there's spiritual stuff in there, but also conversations about colonialism and what that looks like. So just wanted to give a shout out to that piece. And I know we're teasing out the idea big T and little t taste, but I think it would be helpful for us to talk about some of our little t tastes. Like if you are listening with us, however many hours we are into this conversation, maybe you care about what our personal taste is. And you, Amelia, sent me this polyester manifesto. And I sat with these questions. We'll link it again. We'll link it. People can download it. But it's got some lovely questions on it about helping people refine what their personal taste is, and really their personal taste, aligning their personal taste to their political beliefs or the world that they want to live in. And so I wonder if we could spend some time here.
Yeah, I think that that would be great. So, as you said, we'll link this in the show notes, but I found this manifesto through so randomly a whole series of manifestos that WeTransfer, the like digital transfer site, it has been sharing. And Polyester is a feminist, I believe, intersectional feminist arts and culture podcast and publication. And so they put out this manifesto, the like tagline of which is have faith in your own bad taste. And so through a series of kind of proclamations and questions, they're sort of teasing out like what is taste, what is good taste versus bad taste, how do you maneuver between them, and how do you cultivate your own sense of personal taste in the process. So I'm curious, Taylor, like what stood out to you, or was there a sort of line or a question that really helped you originally kind of sink into this?
I think what was most compelling to me was the defining bad taste. And I'll read what it says on the poster. So define bad taste. In doing so, remember that taste in its popular conception is massively influenced by money, the algorithm, and traditional senses of aspiration. If you're defining taste in line with your values around these things, what does bad taste really mean? And it was one of those moments where I had like ooh, what does bad taste mean? Like, if I get to be the purveyor of taste through my values, what is something that is in bad taste? And I got a list that is really different than anything that I would have come up with. If you would have just asked me to say what bad taste is, I wouldn't have come up with this. So I would love to swap some thoughts on bad taste from our own worldviews if you're up for it.
Oh, absolutely. Please begin by reading me this list. I am like so curious.
Okay. In my opinion, bad taste is exclusionary. Bad taste is restrictive and harmful to others. Bad taste, in my perspective, is really aligned with anything that is policing. And again, I would not have come up with that before. I think bad taste to me too is like unnecessary hierarchies is in really, and you know this from like some of our work together. I'm like, why does there need to be a hierarchy here? And again, this list is like, if you would have asked me what's bad taste, I probably would have been like, I hate when people have huge logos emblazoned on them. I think that's in bad taste. And I do stand by that. I'm like, there is something in me that loves the like, and look at me being a contradiction. There's something in me that loves like the almost exclusionary old money of like, if you know this thing is expensive, you know, and if you don't, you don't. But even as I'm saying that, like part of that is exclusionary. Part of that is like, you just like this nice thing. And if someone knows that that nice thing costs you a lot of money and someone else doesn't know, like more power to either of them. So, but yeah, I didn't expect for me to perceive taste in that way, where I'm like, oh, everything that I think is in bad taste is when people are trying to put themselves outside of or above other groups of people rather than just fully owning what they love. This is kind of getting into the good taste piece of it, but I really think that earnestness is in good taste. Like, I love seeing people love what they love. I think apathy is out. As someone who has tried to be apathetic and be everything to everyone, I just love a person who's like, I'm obsessed with this thing. It is very specific. I know some people don't like it, and I love it. And I'm like, ooh, yes, you are the type of person that I want to be friends with, as long as they can hold space that everyone doesn't have to like it. That gets back to like the policing. When we say, I love this thing, so you have to love it, rather than I love this thing, can you be with me in the fact that I love it outside of how you feel about it, as long as it is not harmful to others?
Yeah, I think there's some real overlap in our sense of bad taste. And then also maybe something in that last piece where I have a question or an intuition that might be a little different. So for me, bad taste also brought up some of the words you used. So to me, bad taste is dogmatic and hierarchical. That definitely came up for me as well. Any sense of like, this is good or bad, like that dogmatic nature of it, I'm just like, this is bad taste. Like, who cares? That's not the point of this. As well as any sense of like, this is better or worse, I just don't find interesting. I also think to me, bad taste is unconsidered. So I think good taste typically has an impulse or a reason behind it. Like someone's either like thought through this or they've like actively made a choice or they've had a really strong urge that led them toward this thing. And I think that I don't think it's in good taste when something is like over engineered or under engineered. Either it's like bland because nobody cared about it, or it's like too strategic and it like totally went to the level of like nobody actually had a stake and a feeling in this. It was just like a logical reasoning that led us here. So those are some of my words. I agree with you. I love when people are just earnest and in it and honest about who they are and what they like. And for me, this actually kind of goes back into the just taste distinctions, but sometimes like I look at somebody and I'm like, you have great taste. I don't like a single thing that you're wearing or being or doing sometimes. Again, there are limits to that, but like sometimes there's an ability I feel like, and I'm curious how you think about this, where I can be like, that's great taste and I don't like it. Like it's not my personal preference, but I still recognize it as great taste.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I agree with you. Like, there are things where I'm like, ooh, this is so well made, or this is considered. I love that word considered. I don't know if, actually, I think we talked about the 3 word exercise for your personal style. And I was talking about it with one of my friends last week, and one of her words was curated. I'm gonna send her considered because I think she might be like, ooh, maybe that's actually the word. But there was something for her and for you about there were choices made here, intentional choices made, and then this outfit came together, or in this room came together. And like there are friends whose houses I go to and I'm like, I would not decorate this way, but you chose these things and they have stories and that's beautiful. I am curious, you're saying like you feel like there's a slight diversion in where we ended up. So I want to tease that out.
Yeah, I was just thinking about your sort of like desire for friendship, perhaps, or like being able to see that with people. And what's coming up for me is that a lot of the traditional words I would associate with bad taste would be like tacky, or they're very like classist and racist and sexist and all of these things. But also, we live in 2025. And I would say that our current US president has a very clear aesthetic that I find to be bad taste. And some of that is in alignment with these values that I've said, right? Like it's hierarchical, it's dogmatic, it's not considered. Like those are all true. But there's also like when someone aligns themselves aesthetically with an ideology that I vehemently oppose, I will sometimes call it bad taste. Like MAGA bros have bad taste, or like I don't like the aesthetic of the far right. And it's not just that I don't like the aesthetic, but it's like when somebody shows up with that aesthetic, I might say something like, "Ooh, that's bad taste." Do you ever have that impulse or think or talk about it that way? Or how do you think about like political aesthetics here?
Yeah. And to be clear, when I was talking before, it's like I don't watch much reality TV. But for my friends who like love it, and if we're getting brunch and they want to tell me about, I do love drama, that like low stakes drama that's not related to me. So if they want to tell me that, I can be in that with them and I don't have to watch Love Island to like hear the crazy thing that happened. That's what I mean.
And you don't think they have bad taste because they like it and you don't.
Yeah, exactly. It's like cool. I think the political piece is a little bit different. The question that immediately comes to mind for me, though, is how considered is that choice? Because I'm thinking of people on TikTok who there's this idea of Republican makeup, which is very, I mean, I'm struggling to describe it without saying like it's not well done makeup. It's not flattering on many people. And once this came out and there started being think pieces on it, there were people who said, I am accidentally wearing Republican makeup. Can you help me figure out how to make my makeup look less Republican? So there also could just be these instances where someone lives in a certain place, was raised a certain way, and a lot of people in their demographic are doing acts and they don't know. So for an example, more specifically, like the Proud Boys, they had these, I forget the designers' names, but a lot of them were wearing these black logos with like yellow detailing on them. If I saw someone wearing that, I would probably be like, I want to avoid that person, especially if I don't know them. But if there was like a dude that I went to high school or college with, and I know them generally to be a good person who is aligned with my beliefs, I would probably just ask them, hey, where did you get that? Are you aware of the other connotations of it? I think it's really relational and contextual. How would I approach these things? So TLDR, I do think certain things are in bad taste, and I wonder about the motivation behind them. And if I have a close relationship with someone, I would feel comfortable asking them and perhaps informing them why this thing is in bad taste.
Yeah, and I think this gets into like taste always happens in a context. And this is, one of the reasons I still struggle with personal taste is because sometimes I think people use the language of personal taste or personal preference really to be like, well, I just like this thing and I don't have to justify it and that's okay. And yes, you can like something and not justify it. But what if what you like is shitty politics or like is harming other people? And I think this comes up because like obviously I live in Nebraska. I live in a very like conservative steeped culture. And I get this a lot. That's just like, oh, well, I just like what I like. And like, don't yuck my yum. And I'm like, yeah, but your yum like is 3 steps away from like grave harm to people. Your yum is like in this lineage of political ideology that's so problematic, but people frame it as just like, it's just what I like. It's just my preference. And like, that's unimpeachable. And that's where I'm like, no, like taste happens in a context. And so I always want to be thinking about that context. But I take your point that like also we have to take up intentionality because you can totally accidentally wear something that you didn't realize had a signification, had a certain meaning to others. And so, yeah, I think in our group chat, I sent you a conversation on the Money with Katie show with Dr. Tressie McMillan Cottom about beauty and status and power. And I don't think she names Republican makeup, but she talks about this phenomenon of like the sort of poorly done makeup and the way that it seems to signal within Trump's cabinet, like a compliance to try to look a certain way for him. And so I think that we do signal things through the aesthetic choices we make. And that may or may not actually be about our personal preference or what we like. It may actually be about the power we're trying to access. Or now I've like wrapped myself in a circle, but it's both like, I love a political t-shirt and I want to wear one. And also, I don't know if that means I have good taste or I don't know if that has anything to do with taste at the end of the day. What comes up for you in that sort of knot I just tied myself in, Taylor?
I don't know if I can help you get out of that knot. I might just be climbing into the knot with you and we're tangled together. Yeah, I think it's really interesting when we talk about taste and politics and aesthetics and design. There are so many facets that can come together. So like, yes, it's great to have a political tee that supports what you want. But then oh my gosh, I'm starting to tangle myself up because then I'm like, okay, then who's making that t-shirt? And like, what does that say about, like, there are so many layers of taste and values and politics that we could get into, especially when we talk about taste as it relates to personal style, like clothing. So yeah, I'm of two minds because I hear you when it's like, there's a very black phrase that is sometimes passive aggressive. That's like, if you like it, I love it. And it normally means like, I don't like it, but I'm quote unquote liking it for you. And there are elements where I'm like, yeah, like don't yuck someone's yum. And what if your yum, you're blind to the ways that your yum is hurting other people? And I think about this a lot in overconsumption and like the people who have all, and this is probably out of style at this point, but like all the different Stanley cups that can match with their outfits and all the different charms that go on it. And it's like, yes, you love this thing, but to what end? And what are the downstream effects of that? So there's the element of being able to say, yes, I like what I like, and being able to ask, what are the effects of me liking what I like? Is I think what we're trying to invite people into is acknowledging and owning what you like and situating it within your values in a broader context. And if part of your values are about care for other people, like a politics of care, then that requires you to be able to like something and maybe not engage with it in the same way that you would because you care about other people and your liking is not above someone else living or existing.
Yes. I think you untangled that so beautifully. Thank you. I It also reminds me of one of the other points from this manifesto we started my whole divergence with. But one of the points from the Polyester Manifesto is don't be set in your ways and read the reviews. So part of what they're saying is like, be aware of the context, right? Like, don't make something accidentally the hallmark of your style and then never notice that it also happens to be like Nazi iconography or something like that, right? Like, be aware of the context, read the reviews, not because you have to agree with them, but so that you have the awareness. And also, don't be set in your ways. Like, be open to shifting and changing and evolving in your sense of taste. And I really appreciate those reminders as we're kind of digging into like the questions to ask yourself. And a lot of this has to do with, I suppose, like your positionality and intersectionality, which is like how you interrogate taste is going to be shaped by your relationship to power. And the more aligned your taste is with the people in power, perhaps the less you'll be asked to interrogate it, but the more you might need to interrogate it. And I think that that also shapes the invitations we have for people listening to this. So Taylor, you shared earlier, like, you're in this place where you're just trying to reconnect with personal preference, with personal taste, with what you actually like. And that's a beautiful practice. And I think important for all of us. But that may not be the same invitation for somebody, you know, like myself. I think what I'm being asked to do out of this conversation is like continue to dissect my commitment to like quote unquote good taste and the like whiteness inherent in that concept. And so there's so many different ways in, and I'm curious what you might be taking away from this conversation or everything we've discussed so far.
At the risk of oversimplifying it, I think it comes down to understanding what you like and then asking why. So understanding what you like is the basic taste, preference, etc. The asking why, I think, is both getting at the systems, the algorithms, the whatever cultural responses that might shape it, but also harkening back to our PhD conversation, just like asking why you're motivated by something or why you feel that like one approach is better or worse than the other can surface a lot. And like you were saying, how there can be this insidious elitism that's residue from your experience in PhD. There's certainly times where I feel that too, where I have a reaction to something and I'm asking why, and it's because I was told that this thing is tacky or bad. And then when I interrogate it, it's like, oh, that is steeped in purity culture that I was raised in. And like, it's totally okay for a woman to choose how she shows her body. I just had like that knee-jerk evangelical reaction that I still haven't fully shaken. So yeah, figure out what you like and ask why. And I think the last thing, we didn't speak about this in the manifesto, but it encourages you to identify who your tastemakers are. And one of the things, I've done versions of this practice even before I saw it in the manifesto, is the more that I identify whose taste I admire, I'm able to clarify what it is that I want to cultivate in myself as a person and in my own personal sense of taste. For me, I'm really drawn to like interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary people who are drawing from multiple sources. And it probably comes as no surprise as someone who is drawing from multiple sources, but that's helped me lean into it. So yeah, my 3 takeaways: figure out what you like, ask why, identify your taste makers, and see what that says about you and the world you want to live in.
Beautiful. I think that's a really grounding ending to a very conceptual conversation, which is like one of your skill sets and one of your magical talents for sure. Well, dear listener, if you made it this far, we want to know what you think about taste. We want to know if you're getting a PhD. We want to know anything that's come up for you as you listen to this episode. There is an absolute treasure trove of links in the show notes that you can find on Substack. So head there if you want to dive deeper into any of these topics. And we'll also include some links that we didn't even get to mentioning, but we collected as we were preparing for this. So tons and tons of good stuff to explore there. And then join us in the conversation in the comments on Substack. We would love to hear from you and continue these explorations of taste together. Taylor, do you have any final words for the people?
Thanks for being here. This was a lot, and you're still here. We love you.
Yes, we love you. And until next month, we are thinking of you. Bye for now.
Bye.